This week at the movies, a grizzled old TV series gets a new look and a shot of adrenaline.
I pity the fool who has to review the A-Team.
Give my team an hour. We're unbeatable.
Also coming up this week,
the only way to stop them is to face them.
Jackie Chan as a kung fu master and Jaden Smith as his pupil in a new version of The Karate Kid.
You wonder why I'm still working at this age.
A new documentary whose title says it all. Joan Rivers, A Piece of Work.
Plus, in honor of the remakes of The A-Team and The Karate Kid, we name the most overrated and underrated movies of the 1980s.
Hell no. I ain't stepping foot in any type of aircraft.
Man up! Get in the plane. We gotta finish the escape. Man up and get in there.
Putting the team back together.
How do you plan on stopping him?
Don't sweat him. This just got exciting.
Not one but two 80s franchises get a reboot. This week's show couldn't get more 80s if Tony and I reenacted a scene from Revenge of the Nerds 2, Nerds in Paradise. I'm Michael Phillips of the Chicago Tribune.
I thought we reenacted that every week. And I'm A.O. Scott of the New York Times.
Overkill is underrated. That's what Liam Neeson's Hannibal Smith tells one of his missile-launching cronies in the movie version of The A-Team. And Neeson may be the only actor alive who could have found a way to understate that overstatement.
I'm told you're a hell of a chopper pilot.
The best, sir.
I'm not getting on the chopper with this nut job.
I'm a ranger, baby.
I'm worried.
I'm a ranger, sir.
That's good enough for me.
Neeson plays Hannibal Smith. The role originated in the 1980s TV series by George Peppard. Now, the difference is pretty radical. Peppard's mugging basically told viewers that the whole thing was a joke, whereas Neeson's temperament is a little darker by nature. The movie's A-Team is stationed in Baghdad during the troop drawdown when they get word of Saddam's cronies planning on counterfeiting billions in U.S. currency. Now, what I just said doesn't explain how the guys end up in a tank attached to a parachute.
What the hell am I trying to hit? Trust me. Rotate the turret 82 degrees. Fire no! Fire! Boom!
You trying to shoot down that other drone?
No, they're trying to fly that tank.
And I truly wish we had a clip of the scene where Hannibal and B.A. Baracus, played by mixed martial arts star Quinton Rampage Jackson, discuss Gandhi's theories of nonviolent resistance. I'm serious. Instead, well, how about this?
Just a heck of a beautiful place. This a timeshare? I'd love to get in there.
Good morning.
Bradley Cooper from The Hangover and Charlton Copley from District 9 round out the team. Jessica Biel is more or less wasted as Cooper's ex, charged with bringing this rogue unit to heel. The director is Joe Carnahan, who made a film I hated, Smokin' Aces. But you know what? Bombastic as it is, I sort of like the A-Team, at least until it starts spinning its wheels in the final half hour. I say rent it, and you see what a disappointing movie Summer, Tony, can do to a guy's standards?
Yeah, I mean, and I say skip it. I mean, there's stuff in it, you know, that's okay. Bradley Cooper was pretty good. Patrick Wilson playing this mysterious CIA nemesis of the A-Team is all right.
Good. He's good.
But I feel like there was nothing here that I haven't seen on television 100 times. I think what you said about Peppard and Neeson really gets to the problem with this movie, which is that it can't figure out what tone it wants to take. So sometimes it's trying to be sort of tongue-in-cheeky and boisterous and rambunctious. Other times it's a very, you know, serious, somber, revenge-driven drama.
Right.
And the whole thing just has this kind of leathery, macho, dumb, thick-neck
Well,
feel.
yes, okay, going in, you know that. You know you're going to get that. It's
But
basically...
I was not charmed by it.
Well, I think the issue here is that it really does play like 2 episodes of the 80s TV series back-to-back, but we should point out that it's been roughed up. It's a lot more violent than the series was, which was really much more of a kind of a camp variation on things like The Dirty Dozen and all that. And this is kind of, as you say, in between. And the action is pretty third-rate.
I have to say, even like, you know, the fight scenes, the sort of the close hand-to-hand combat scenes where people are punching each other out are completely incoherently staged and edited.
Here's the reason I think it's worth renting. I think it's better plotted, truly, most of the way than I would have expected. And I think even though it's a little bit of a oddity to have a guy like Neeson playing it more or less for real, he kind of grounds it and at least anchors what is a pretty good ensemble, I'd say. So
yeah, the ensemble is fine, but it's still a pretty bad movie. Next up is a bracing, touching documentary called Joan Rivers, A Piece of Work, and Is She Ever? Now, you might think of Joan Rivers as a groundbreaking comedian, or you might think of her as a bit of a joke. A has-been, clinging to the last shreds of her celebrity and her dignity by doing things like appearing on Donald Trump's Celebrity Apprentice. But whatever you think of her, and even if you don't have much of an opinion at all, this movie will be a real eye-opener.
The minute you're not angry about things, the minute you're not upset about things, what are you talking about? Oh, my grandson was so cute. It's not my comedy.
There is Rivers working as hard as ever in her mid-70s, identifying the force that drives every great comedian: anger. Filmmakers Ricky Stern and Ann Sundberg spent a year observing their subject closely and collecting clips from her younger days. The portrait that emerges is of a woman who is vain, anxious, profane, reckless, honest, and frequently brilliant. But even after 40 years in show business, she still lives in fear of fading away.
Last year was a very difficult year. I was playing, here we go, the Bronx at 4:30 in the afternoon. I'll show you fear. If my book ever looked like this, it would mean that nobody wants me, and that everything I ever tried to do in life didn't work.
Rivers paved the way for provocative female comics like Kathy Griffin and Sarah Silverman, but she's not ready to be an icon or a legend. She's sometimes appalling, sometimes pathetic, but never dull, and Joan Rivers, A Piece of Work, is definitely worth seeing.
Yes, see it. Yeah, I think a lot of comedians would be happy to turn a year of their life over to a camera crew and a director, and they would feel like, okay, warts and all, here I go. In this case, you really do get the sense that she is tuning out the camera half the time, and you're getting honest glimpses of everything from, you know, career crisis. You know, I mean, you have all these interesting detours, like, you know, doing a gig, a casino gig in northern Wisconsin, which turns into a very tense
she shouts down a heckler. It's amazing.
Some of what's going on in this film, Tony, I think is you can apply to almost any comedian.
Right,
just the, you know, the fear, the anger, everything, the drive, but the specific biographical issues here.
Well, it's fascinating because she's a woman coming up, you know, who came up in what was then and what still is a very guy-dominated profession, and she's so honest and she's so self-aware and she's so damn smart. I mean, this is a really, really smart, if, you know, sometimes troubled and sometimes abrasive woman.
Right, and I think like Don Rickles, who shows up in this film, you get this, you get the sense here and there that she really could have, would have been a tremendous straight actress.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. Coming up next, Jackie Chan and Jaden Smith take over for Pat Morita and Ralph Macchio in the reboot of The Karate Kid.
And later, Katherine Heigl and Ashton Kutcher star in Killers. It opened last weekend. Is it worth your catching up with?
Take off your jacket. Take it down. Put it on.
You ready?
Take it off.
I already did.
Jacket off.
Let's go.
Focus!
Back in 1984, Gene Siskel reviewed The Karate Kid for the Chicago Tribune as well as for this show, and he wasn't alone in liking, not loving, the movie. He also wondered if it wasn't 20-25 minutes too long. Well, now we have the remake of The Karate Kid, and at 2 hours and 20 minutes, it's about 40-45 minutes too long.
Me and my mom, we just moved in, 305. The hot water's not working. Okay. Or I could just come back another time.
The new version begins in Detroit and then relocates to Beijing, where young Dre, played by Jaden Smith, and his mother, played by Taraji P. Henson, have moved because China's where the jobs are. In that first scene, Jackie Chan is the apartment handyman who helps Dre face up to the ferocious bullies making his new life miserable. This mentor figure has feet not just of fury, but of wisdom.
I kind of just want to learn the Cobra thing.
Cobra takes a lifetime. It requires great focus.
But I have great focus. Oh my God. Miss Han?
Your focus needs more focus.
And he's not afraid of inflicting all sorts of training montages on his pupil. If The Karate Kid, which should really be called The Kung Fu Kid, teaches us anything beyond the mysterious half-life of 1980s artifacts, it's that there's more to martial arts than destroying your opponent. It's the cliches you deliver en route that count. Jaden Smith plays it so cool as Dre, he periodically freezes over altogether. But because of the location work, And because Henson and Chan are good screen company in any circumstance, The Karate Kid is, for me, a rent it, even though it's just as corny as the '84 version, I'd say, Tony.
It's a rent it for me, too. I think it's not as good as the '84 version, and I'd say that not just out of nostalgia, but because I think that was a more satisfying drama. It's basically the same story, but I think there's a problem with, as you identify, with Jaden Smith, who just is not quite actor enough yet to deliver this character. I think the story is very thin for a movie that's so long, but I think what's good about it, what was most interesting to me about it, is how much of China there is in it. I mean, it's a co-production with the Beijing Film Studios, and it really does give you a sense that I think is unusual in a Hollywood movie, of China as a real place where people live and what it looks like through the eyes of these Westerners.
Right, I agree. And to the point where Beijing is actually covering for Detroit in much of it, because they filmed the Detroit sequences over there. But I think there's one, as faithful as this storyline in the new version is to the old one, there's one enormous change we should talk about, which is the idea of taking this young protagonist who was played by Ralph Macchio in his early 20s. He was 23 years old at the time. Now we're talking about an 11-year-old playing a 12-year-old. It is not the same experience, I say, Tony, when you see an 11-year-old go through these bone-crushing encounters with the bullies. This break his leg stuff on the mat. To me, that's an unsettling change.
It's unsettling, and I don't think even the most evil dojo in the world would send kids out to break the legs of 11. Also, Jackie Chan, when he first faces down the gang of bullies that are chasing Jaden Smith through the alleyways, he beats up a bunch of 12 and 13-year-old kids, which is a somewhat, I mean, they have it coming, but yet on the other hand.
So in the next remake, these characters are going to be 5 years old, I think.
Well, that'll be scary.
So with the release of the A-Team and the Karate Kid, is there anything original coming out of Hollywood these days? We're going to ask our special guest, Stephanie Zaharek, from MovieLine.com in a web exclusive. Just go to atthemoviestv.com.
And coming up next, we get you caught up with movies now in theaters, including Killers with Ashton Kutcher and Katherine Heigl, and Agora with Rachel Weisz.
Surprise! I'm back! You're burning him!
Upstairs, in the bedside table, there's a Glock 45.
What?
It's a gun! Just go get it!
Why do you have a gun?
Just get it!
That was a scene from Killers, a new action comedy starring Katherine Heigl and Ashton Kutcher. It was released last weekend and for some mysterious reason not screened for critics.
What's it about? It's about 97 minutes long. And that's the best thing I can say about it. Okay, Ashton Kutcher as a suave international CIA assassin. Look, you throw an ascot on Ashton Kutcher, it doesn't equal suave. It's not a mathematical equation.
Well, and then he has to settle down and pretend to be a normal suburban husband because he wants to give that life of international espionage and assassination up. And marry Katherine Heigl, who is... one of the problems with this movie is you don't know who her character is or who she's supposed to be. I think she's a quite gifted comic actress when she's allowed to be, but she just kind of, walks around looking disapproving and holding up a gun.
Right. And you call it an action comedy, Tony. If there were anything on either side of that description that actually, made sense or got an audience in sort of an old-fashioned, satisfying way, the action... no good. The comedy barely exists. And why isn't it more of a screwball comedy?
Well,
like the premise sort of
I mean, as I was watching it, I thought, why this should be and could be a really fun, entertaining, silly movie, and it isn't.
Also in theaters, Agora, starring Rachel Weisz.
Whatever may be going on in the streets, we are brothers. Where are the troops?
No army could contain that mob. He's calling for the annihilation of women and children.
This is a really interesting and unusual movie. You could describe it in a way as a sexy librarian movie, because that's what Rachel Weisz is. She plays Hypatia, a scientist, an astronomer, a philosopher who's also the keeper of the famous Library of Alexandria in Egypt in the 4th century. And this is a costume drama with a lot of tunics and togas. It's also a story, I thought, very interesting and moving and provocative story about religious intolerance and how it suppresses the scientific spirit and persecutes a character like this Hypatia.
So you're
I like it. I think it's a terrific movie. I think it's kind of like the Passion of the Christ for liberals.
I like that. A good description. I wish the movie kind of caught fire for me. As much as I admire Rachel Weisz and also Michael Lonsdale, fantastic as her father, who really is kind of the keeper of this, what at that time in history was the world's great library. I kind of kept waiting for both dramatically and cinematically to kind of really get me. Didn't quite do it, so I say skip it.
It did it for me. I think it's a kind of a great movie for history nerds and science nerds and all kinds of nerds. And last but not least, Winter's Bone.
He doesn't show at trial, see? The way the deal works is you all gonna lose this place. You got some place to go?
I'll find him.
Girl, I've been looking.
I said I'll find him.
Now, this was a big hit at the Sundance Film Festival last year. Deborah Granick's film with an excellent performance from Jennifer Lawrence as a 17-year-old Missouri Ozarks girl who's, in charge of, her two younger siblings, and it's a search for her missing father so she can hang on to this homestead. And it's this kind of interesting poverty line mystery that's in a way like Frozen River, which was another Sundance hit. And I'd say that both films are good. This lead performance, excellent.
I think her performance and also John Hawkes' performance as her uncle, who's named Teardrop, and the way it is a little bit like a kind of a typical Sundance movie, regional realist, but it does have a real kind of local texture and a feeling of what the kind of the family, the large kinship network that she's part of, who basically are a bunch of crystal meth dealers.
And and that's all sociologically on point. But I think the movie doesn't get sort of lost in that sort of atmosphere or the documentary quality. It's telling a story.
It's telling a story. I wouldn't overpraise it, but I would say see it. Coming up next, remember the 80s? We do, but we're old. And we remember some of the most over and underrated movies of that long ago decade.
They work for peanuts.
The A-Team, The Karate Kid, it's 80s week here on At the Movies. Now, compared to the 70s and the 90s, the movies of the 1980s get kind of a bad rap. But maybe the whole decade is underrated, which makes it a perfect subject for our over-under segment. So, surveying the vast history of cinema in the 1980s, what would be your pick for the underrated film?
Okay, it's not a great film, but it's a great time. Andrei Konchalovsky's Runaway Train. Jon Voight. Eric Roberts, escaped convicts who break out of this horrible gulag in Alaska.
And then what happens?
They actually get onto a train that has no brakes, or the driver has a heart attack like that.
Don't you love movies where the title tells you just what you're going to get?
Everything.
Right.
And I like the film a lot because it's got this crazy collision between these high-flown disquisitions about life and death that came from a Kurosawa script in the 60s, and it's pure pulp. I enjoy it. I can't defend it really logically, but I love it.
It's a good time.
What about you?
Well, mine is I think, really one of the most, not just underrated, but criminally maligned movies of all time. It's Elaine May's Ishtar, in which Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman play a pair of sort of lounge entertainers who end up in a kind of Hope and Crosby road trip across the Arabian deserts. Now, this is a movie that has gone down in history as one of the great epic disasters of Hollywood with, Heaven's Gate and Showgirls. And in fact, when you actually watch it and put that out of your mind, it's this odd, eccentric, very charming and clever, very strange comedy.
The one thing I really like about it is the conversation with Dustin Hoffman. He's trying to teach Warren Beatty, who's from Wisconsin, I believe, the pronunciation of the word schmuck, which is not smuck, but schmuck.
It's that kind of thing. I mean, it's odd that this is all happening on this sort of grand scale.
Too much. That's my problem with it. It's too big. It's very pricey looking, expensive. You've got the greatest cinematographer in the world working on it, Storaro.
I kind of like that. It's an odd movie. It's definitely an oddity, a curiosity, but I think it's kind of a hidden gem.
Let's go to overrated, shall we?
Overrated.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Robert Zemeckis' mashup of all the Disney characters, cartoon characters, with the Warner Brothers stable, Bugs Bunny, the rest of them, inside this film noir plot. Tony, this is a film, I still don't know why I get so little pleasure from what is a formidable technical achievement, but it leaves me worse than cold.
I like that. I think it's a lot of fun, and I think it's an interestingly influential movie because, the combination of live action and animation has become such a staple of filmmaking these days. You can go, trace a line from Avatar all the way back to Roger Rabbit.
Joyless. I say joyless.
Speaking of joyless, my pick for most overrated is a movie that is not a terrible movie in itself, but when we complain about romantic comedies and how bad they are and how the characters have just been so blandified and the situation so uninteresting, that can be traced back to When Harry Met Sally, which was the most overrated movie of the 1980s.
Whoa, you think so? I think
one of them.
No, I think you're blaming the after effects stuff. That's a good romantic comedy. What are you talking about?
It's a mediocre romantic comedy.
Coming up next, can't decide what to see in theaters? Stay tuned for my 3 to see.
It's alarm.
Closed captioning for At the Movies is sponsored by Hotel provided by Park Hyatt Chicago, Chicago's award-winning hotel and luxury dining experience, located in the heart of Chicago's Magnificent Mile on Water Tower Square.
Okay, folks, we'll close with my 3 to see. Number 3, the controversial, provocative thriller Splice, which goes in directions you can never quite predict. Number 2, Winter's Bone, featuring a superb performance from Jennifer Lawrence. And number 1, Joan Rivers, A Piece of Work, a compelling fly-on-the-wall documentary. Warning, she's working blue in this movie.
That's it for now. We'll leave you with a recap of this week's show. Now you can join the discussion by following us on Facebook and Twitter. Just go to atthemoviestv.com to find out how.
And join us next week for reviews of the much-anticipated Toy Story 3 and Cyrus with John C. Reilly, Marissa Tomei, and Jonah Hill. And until then, we'll be at the movies.